Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Passover plot, John chapter 11, verses 47 through 57. I'm backing up a couple verses to verse 45. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary, this is after Lazarus has been raised from the dead, and saw what he had done, believed in him. And so a number of the Jews believed, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. So a bunch of people have seen, some believed, some told. I suppose there were some who believed that did tell, not for the purposes of trying to get a reward or something like that, but just because they were excited about what had been happening. But others come for their own motives to report it to the Pharisees, who were out to arrest Jesus. Verse 47, therefore the chief priests and the Pharisees, and we've commented already about the chief priests and the Pharisees would be a bit like describing the Democrats and the Republicans, and people that are not on the same party. The chief priests were mostly from the grouping of the Sadducees. There were the occasional Pharisees there. But here they've joined forces. They convened a council, and the term council is the Greek term Sanhedrin. Now, that's not necessarily the official Sanhedrin. This isn't necessarily the entire high priestly court of the Jews. Instead, this might just be because it doesn't have the definite article with it. So it just might be a council, which is an okay way to translate it. And they were saying, what are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. Now, they haven't stopped to consider that the signs that he's performing might actually point to something that they're supposed to pay attention to. But they're so blinded, they haven't looked at the signs and to see what they're pointing to. They're just complaining he's performing so many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, which a lot of people were believing in him. And here's the clincher, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. So notice they are politically motivated, but also they are personally and professionally motivated. It's not a motivation to seek the truth. It's a motivation to keep what they have, both politically, but also their own personal positions, their positions of power. They don't want to lose power. And they're seeking to justify it, saying, well, that's good for the nation, but really it's good for them. Really, it's all about them. Verse 49, but one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now you say, wait a second, what do you mean that year? I thought that the high priest was supposed to be high priest for life. That's the way it had always been in the past. And that's true. But since the Romans had come into power, they didn't like the idea that one person could hold so much power and influence for life. And so they had pulled the strings for the high priest to officially step down. High priest had been somebody named Annas, and he had stepped down. Initially, he had had one of his sons become the high priest, but he only had so many sons, and so after a while, he had to choose somebody else. And now he's chosen Caiaphas. Caiaphas is his son-in-law, so he's keeping it close to home or close to the family. But Caiaphas is now the high priest. Incidentally, one of the ways the Romans made this stick is the Romans would hold on to the high priestly garments, and they would keep them, I don't know, in a closet somewhere, but under Roman guard. And when the high priest needed to perform his duties, he would have to go to the Romans saying, it's time for me to do my duties. Can I please have my clothes for the official duties? And the Romans would give that outfit, that apparel, the high priestly garb to the high priest. And when he was done, they took it back. That was a great affront, but there was just nothing to be done about it. And so Caiaphas, high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all. Now, it's sort of interesting that he says this, now probably saying more than he realizes, because we had the Pharisees and the high priests, not the high priest, but the authorities say, we know that this man is a sinner. As for this man, we don't know where he's from. They had confessed their own lack of knowledge, and now we're finding out even the high priest says, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Nor do you take into account that it is expedient for you that one man die for the people and that the whole nation not perish. This idea that now Caiaphas is saying, if we've got problems, let's just get rid of the problem. One man dying for the people. Again, he's really, seeking to protect his own position. But the idea that one man died for the people, let me just say, Caiaphas was saying more than he realized. And that's not me coming to that conclusion. That's actually going to be John the writer. Let's look at the next verse. Verse 51. Now he did not say this on his own initiative. I mean, there was nothing making him. Caiaphas wasn't saying, gee, I want to have a different conversation. But suddenly I'm being forced by God to, no. He was saying this, but there was a supernatural power at work of which he was unaware, where his words have one meaning to himself and a completely different meaning to us as we read it. You say, which one's right? Well, they both are. But being high priest that year, he prophesied. He didn't know he was prophesying. He thought he was just plotting. This is his Passover plot. He's plotting to have Jesus murdered, unrealizing that he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation. And let me just say, Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. You see, John the writer tells us not only did Caiaphas say more than he imagined, he said more than he would. If he realized the extent of his words, he would have said, oh, what did I say? What did I say? Notice that he might gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. Who are the children of God that are scattered abroad? The Jewish children of God? No, I think John is hinting that there's something more than this, that Jesus was going to die, yes, not just for the nation, not just for the Jews, but for all mankind. Notice, for the children of God who are scattered abroad. Who are the children of God? Those who believe in his name. John set that forth way back in John chapter 1. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. This is, like I said, the Passover plot, where Jesus has become the target of their murderous plans. Therefore, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim. Now, Ephraim, this is not the tribe of Ephraim, has the same name, but this is a city somewhere. Notice it's the country near the wilderness. When you went to the Judean wilderness, you just went over the Mount of Olives and passed a couple of villages, and then you were in the wilderness. So somewhere presumably in that direction. And there he stayed with his disciples. So Jesus has gone officially into hiding. Verse 55, now the Passover of the Jews was near. Now, we've already seen a number of Passovers in the Gospel of John. We saw back in John chapter 2, verse 13, soon after the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, where he goes to Jerusalem for a Passover, and that was the time where he had said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up. Of course, he'd been talking about his body, not about the physical temple. And then there was a Passover in John chapter 6 and verse 4. There was another unnamed feast between them. I don't know if that was a Passover. Maybe some other feast. I don't really know. We have no way to tell. And now we're coming to this third Passover here in John chapter 11, verse 55, which by this we say that the ministry of Jesus was at least 2 years plus, 2.5 years or so. Now, it might have been 3.5, depending on if all the Passovers are mentioned, or if John chapter 5 was a Passover. Either of those could mean that his ministry was a bit longer. But at least 2 years plus is the ministry of Jesus. Notice, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. So here they're going through this ceremonial purification, while the Jewish leaders, they may be purified on the outside, they're plotting murder. They're planning their sin. They're planning a murder. They're planning to overthrow and kill and murder the Messiah. They may be purifying the outside, but the inside, it's full of, to quote Jesus in another place, dead men's bones. So they're seeking, verse 56, they were seeking for Jesus and were saying to one another as they stood in the temple, what do you think? That he'll not come to the feast at all? After all, they had come. The feast hasn't started yet, but they're coming early, and no Jesus. So they're looking for him. They're talking about it. Verse 57. Now the chief priests and the Pharisees, and there they are again, the Democrats and the Republicans, these two groups that are normally at odds. They had given orders that if anyone knew where he was to report it so that they might seize him. And we've seen that attempt to seize him a number of times already. Back in John chapter 7 and verse 30, they were seeking to seize him, and no man laid his hand on him because his hour had not yet come. And again in John chapter 7 verse 32, where the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him, and they came back empty-handed. Like, why weren't you able to do that? Well, no one spoke like he did. A bit later, we had John chapter 7, verse 44. Some of them wanted to seize him, but no one laid hands on him. And again, in John chapter 8, verse 20, no one seized him because his hour had not yet come. And again, in chapter 10, verse 39, they were seeking to seize him. They've been seeking him for a long time, but they couldn't because his hour had not yet come. But now we're going to see in the very next verse, in the next chapter, that the hour has come. And it's going to be time, and yet even there, it will be carefully orchestrated by Jesus himself, where they will not be able to take him until just the right time. When he speaks the words, when he gives permission, that's when it's going to take place. You see, I refer to this as a Passover plot. But Jesus was, in a sense, can I say it? He was in on the plot. He's controlling it. And the Passover plot was really not just the chief priests and the Pharisees. It was Jesus, it was the Father, it was God himself who had ordained and predestined and planned for these elements all to come together at just the right time. And as we come to the next chapter, the time will be at hand. So I'll see you then.